Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, January 18th, 2022. Tonight's format, if you're new to our broadcast, is an open forum. So any questions you have, any topics you would like to see me addressed are on the table. If you are a sibling or a family member, a friend of an Evoke client, please let me know who you are. If you're under the age of 18, let me know that also. Just helps me to get to know my audience when I'm addressing specific questions. You can ask questions about family members and siblings, or you can ask questions that they've asked you, and then compare your answers to my answers and see what I have to say on the matter. So, with that, we have some pre-submitted questions. As always, we'll get to those first, and then we'll take any of your live questions. Somebody writes, regarding the Oprah book review podcast, what is the implication for this type of work if the child's trauma is preverbal? They can't give voice to the trauma, so how can they heal? It's a fantastic question. You make them conscious, right? I thought about this a lot, actually. I think somebody asked during the broadcast, how do you find childhood memories? What if you don't remember things from childhood? And while I know people have shared with me, and some of you might have this experience where you can have a childhood memory or an old memory pop up and come into consciousness. But that's not my personal experience with it as a therapist or more specifically as a client. For me, it's about becoming aware of how I feel, how I'm built, how I'm put together today. And then looking back on the situations and circumstances of my childhood, and then they come alive. It's kind of like going back to an old black and white picture and turning it into a color photo. It becomes more alive and more vivid. So you're looking through it through a new lens. I remember, for example, my therapist used to say a lot of things about my parents when I first met with her 20 years ago, and I constantly had the question in my mind, like, how do you know this? Well, you're making, I think, pretty big leaps in describing my parents, and I really haven't described them enough. She would say, well, this is how your context was, or this is how your mother and father raised you, and she was describing that. I think about it today, and every single thing she said, essentially, virtually, is true and is obvious to me. So the coming to consciousness is not necessarily finding the moment, finding the memory. It's coming to consciousness about who you are, how you're wounded today, how you're compromised today, and then looking back at your childhood. I had something more recent occur. I may have shared also, where my 14-year-old, it was a light banter. And at one point she was mocking me for something. I said, please don't mock me. I really don't like to be mocked. And she said kind of flippantly, did somebody make fun of you and your feelings when you were younger? And I said to her, very matter of fact and sober, I said, as a matter of fact, they did. They didn't. I didn't think of it at the time as making fun, but my mother had names for me saying, you're overreacting, you're being dramatic, or actually the phrase she used was melodramatic. So I think bringing it to consciousness is about bringing yourself to consciousness. It's as simple as what I think about when in our wilderness program for kids, for adolescents and young adults. It's having a moment with them where they react to something, and then pausing and stopping what you're doing, and saying, "What's going on for you right now?" And of course, the typical answer often is, initially at least, nothing. Nothing's going on. I was just frustrated. I was just snapping. But because wilderness therapy is wilderness therapy, and you can slow everything down to a crawl, we stop and we say, let's sit with this for a little bit. You kind of snapped at me, or you snapped at your peer or the person sitting next to you. What's going on for you? Where did that come from? And then they start to talk about it. And it might be pre-conscious, which is kind of right beneath the surface. Think about when you're waking up for a dream. That's kind of your pre-conscious state, where it's kind of like one foot in the conscious, one foot in the unconscious, and then there's unconscious, which nobody has access to. They're unconscious until they make it conscious. So the pre-verbal stuff is really, once you understand the person sitting in front of you, or the person in the mirror, you can begin then to look back to your childhood, to your early experiences, and look through this new lens, and they have a different meaning. You see things differently. So when my daughter said to me the other night, when she said, "Did somebody make fun of you?" And I said to her, "Yes," and then we both chuckled, and I said, "It's actually not very funny because it was a fundamental wound of my mother gaslighting me growing up when my feelings were too big or too much for her." And I said to her, "It wasn't like that's the first time I've thought of that. I've thought of that before. I've had that memory before, but the way that we just stumbled upon it again, it became much more alive and much more vivid, much more tangible." So I think sometimes the words that we have fall short. The pre-verbal or nonverbal trauma can be brought to the surface in a sense by doing your present day work, and then you go back through the present day work, and you find a more visceral, more tangible childhood for yourself. I know there's hypnosis and other things that people can do that can help bring the unconscious conscious. You can use dreams. You can use a lot of art and experiential therapy, body movement. That's why wilderness therapy can be so effective, because so much of the work is physical. It's dealing with the elements and dealing with your peers and cooking together. And it's like play in children. You know, when I was first trained as a therapist, my first job was a play therapist. And what you learn as a play therapist is play is the language of children. And we learn to listen to them. You know, when I wanted to go and talk to 5-year-olds and 8-year-olds and 12-year-olds like I talked to an adult, but that didn't work. They don't have, they're not capable of engaging me, and it's at least off-putting to them to have those kinds of dialogues. Doesn't make sense to them. But if you watch and listen closely enough, their unconscious dilemma, their unconscious trauma will come out in their play, just like it will come out in the relationship you and I might have on January 22nd or January 18th, 2022. So I think it's a little bit different, but that's how you do it. You do your work, and everything is animated, if you will, from your past. Thanks for the question. Great question. Somebody writes this: I've been doing my work and have come to see how I hold my 16-year-old in my mind. I can see how it's wounded her. I encourage and support her, but she overwhelms me. She has a huge personality with big feelings and a too fast mind. Her passions and chaos she creates around me exhaust me. I heard you say that you were too big for your mother. As a mother, as that mother, I am struggling. I will start by being honest with her about my failings and how I have made her feel like the problem. Thinking about her differently will make a difference, I'm sure, but I'm wondering how we will move forward. She's been in a residential care for a year, and I am only now finding myself again able to enjoy quiet moments, relaxed meals, hobbies. We visit regularly, and those go well because I know I can just enjoy her and walk away from the chaos. I don't want to make her small to fit my life, but I don't want to live in hers. Courageous, brave, wonderful question. I think you're doing it. I mean, you know, the one of the founders of attachment theory, Bowlby, who's credited for really naming attachment theory, actually talked about this idea that a boarding school can be, for adolescents, can be an effective intervention, not in a clinical sense, but just a way to kind of help children and parents differentiate. Alice Miller says in the drama The Gifted Child that a parent can give a child what the child needs if only they allow that child to get it from somebody else. So you're already creating circumstances that support your child. Right now, day to day, you're not raising your daughter. She's not in your home, I should say, but you're raising her in a much more fundamental way because she's at a school where she's getting the need and the resources that she requires. Simply put, it's just all of the things that you wrote in your question. It's just embracing those, and maybe even more appropriately said, embodying those things. I talk about this in The Audacity to Be You, in my 3 keys to enlightenment. One of them being, you learn how to lose and get really good at failing. Enlightened people are good at losing and good at failing, and it becomes effortless. It doesn't tax them. It doesn't challenge or stress out their ego because they've surrendered, so to speak. And your question suggests that you're already doing a lot of that. And there's a little part of me that wants to remind you, even what I'm saying to all of you, even if you're not the one asking that question, you can't win. And so you just allow yourself to be the problem, allow yourself to be the limited one. Make it verbal, there's a different kind of energy that comes when you know that it's your limitation that's being taxed, and that it's not her that is the problem, that she's not too big or she's not the wrong shape. It's just that her shape doesn't fit easily or gracefully into yours. So I think you're doing a lot of it. But in the day to day, it looks like, I'm sorry, but here's my limit. I mean, that's the essence of it. I think about that as a therapist when I'm trying to help somebody. And when I fail them, when they say, oh, that doesn't work, or that doesn't fit, or I don't like that idea, or I don't like what you just said. If I can lose and say, I'm sorry, I'm trying my best, I'll keep listening and try again, keep talking. I'm showing that I don't need to be right or good. I don't need to be the hero. I don't need to be on top to be a success, to win. I'm okay losing. So I think it's to embody what you're talking about and to be present. And day to day, it looks like just that. I'm sorry. I need a timeout. It's boundaries. That's what it is. The child doesn't need you to be perfect, all capable, all powerful, omnipotent. What they do need you to do is own it as yours by going to therapy, by practicing healthy self care, by letting them down in the service of taking care of yourself in a healthy way. All of those kinds of things show the child that you're taking care of yourself and you're not waiting for them to take care of you. You're not waiting for them to be your savior, your knight in shining armor, that you're taking care of yourself. So when you say, I'm off to see my therapist, or I'm going to be on my computer in my office with my therapist with my Zoom hour this week, you're constantly showing the child that you're working on the project. Learning to apologize regularly when you come up short is another way to do it. So I think you already have the building blocks, the foundation, the ideas. It's embodying it, and it's simply the idea of, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I'm going to take care of myself, or I'm going to go out to a support group, or I'm going to go to therapy, or I'm going to go watch a baseball game to take care of myself, and letting them be angry and disappointed, but still practicing, maintaining, establishing, and following through on a boundary. The boundary is the evidence of the self. The boundary is how the self is manifested in a relationship. I say this all the time. This is also one of the three keys. It's in that. We have to learn to let people down. We have to learn to drop the ball. We have to learn to come up short. Because if you're practicing healthy self-care, all of those things are going to happen. But if you can't come up short and let people down and fail, you're going to be exhausted and trying to win. So simple boundaries, and I'm sorry, and I'm going to take care of myself in this way, or walk away because I, Brad, I, Dad, I, Mom, am limited. That's the way you do it. That's the way you demonstrate it. Great question. Fantastic, thoughtful question. Somebody writes, our 15-year-old son is home 1 month after being away at wilderness therapy and a residential treatment center. By and large, we're doing okay, using our new skills, communicating openly and authentically, and readjusting to being a whole family again. However, our son feels that the puzzle pieces that the puzzle piece that still doesn't fit states that he has nothing in common with us, dislikes where we live, and wants nothing more than to move out and live on his own. He started to plan on getting his GED and has proposed an unrealistic alternative to living arrangements outside of our family. Being that he is still so young, we struggle with how to balance honoring his feeling and wishes, yet hold our boundary to having him live with us for the simple reason that we love him and want him to be with us until he's 18. Any advice for the push away of the kid who has such a fixed mindset, who's unwilling to try and give our family or environment a chance? That last part of your question is kind of what hit me. Uh, you know, part of what I would say is I was his therapist is I would say that's a healthy instinct. What he's communicating is the instinct to differentiate, and that can feel distancing and confusing to parents. He's starting it younger than the law and your comfort level suggests is appropriate, but it's okay to honor the feelings and hold a boundary. I used to have this slide that I would use in a lot of my broadcasts, and the slide was a picture of a brick wall, and then I had overlaid on top of it a big ear, and I would describe that's really the two tasks in relationship and human behavior is having a boundary or being a self, stating what your boundary is, and listening. So I think you can do both, but again, don't try to win. Don't try to get him to win over to your thinking, to your side. It's the same energy and sentiment that I was just describing to the last question, which is, I'm sorry, this is our limit, our boundary, and it might be wrong, and I get it, and I understand it, and I want to support you in that, um, but I'm not comfortable until you're 18, and then there are still going to be some, I'm sure, some parameters around your support and what that looks like when he's 18. Empathize, understand, honor the story that he's telling you while holding your boundary at the same time, and know that you can't win. I was describing this to somebody just yesterday. I forget who it was, but I was explaining that when a parent is invested in a child feeling something, the child will often stay stuck in their feeling. For example, when a parent wants a child to get over their anger, the child will often stay fixated in his or her or their anger. When a parent allows the child to be angry, has no agenda around the feeling, the child is more likely to move through the feeling, or maybe more accurately, the feeling will move through the child. I had a parent come to me years ago and say, with his young adult borderline daughter, I tried your communication skills and it didn't work. And I said, tell me more. And he said, well, I listened, I reflected, and she was still angry. And I said, can you hear it yet? And he said, not quite. And I said, at some point you were using the skill to still try to get her to feel something different. And she could sense your energy. She knew, even though it was cloaked or disguised in the skills that we teach in solid communication theory and skills, even though it was hidden behind that, she could sense that you were trying to get her over the feeling. And that's probably why she stayed stuck in it. She wanted to stay stuck in her anger and hold on to it, as if to say to you and to the world, my anger is valid and I'm going to prove it by holding on to it until somebody can hear it. Then I can let it go. So don't try to move him intellectually, cognitively. Don't try to move his idea along. Don't try to give him to give you another chance. Let him give up on it. Let him lose hope. Try to understand the world through his eyes, even though it's a different paradigm than you. Empathize, understand, set your boundary clearly, but let him have his thought process. And then eventually you're going to move to a place. I mean, it's not uncommon. Eventually you're going to move to a place where he will be able to differentiate legally and kind of practically. Whereas now it's unrealistic and the plan is unrealistic. It's not uncommon for kids that go through treatment at all. I want all of you to hear this. When the children come home before the age of 18, it's not uncommon for that mismatch to be present. Therapeutic programming will often affect children and families in such a way. It's kind of like thinking about it this way. Imagine if you, listener, adult listener, imagine if you had to move back in with your parents. Maybe there was a financial hardship or a health scare or a divorce or a breakup, and you had to move back with your parents. Even if you liked your parents, loved your parents, it's going to be difficult, right? It's going to be a bad mismatch. Developmentally, things are off. You're supposed to be independent, but we don't know how to do that. We don't know how to live with our children when they are differentiated and independent. So It's kind of like that. The child has been away at wilderness therapy, been away at residential treatment or therapeutic boarding school or transitional, whatever the programming is. Coming back in is going to be a challenge. That's why I always say, and unfortunately, the child doesn't cooperate with this idea. I wish all children could come to programming and graduate from programming on their 18th birthday, right? Have the treatment plan conclude in concert with their 18th birthday, so that we could just kind of navigate that next step with legal freedom, if you will, without the custody issue. It's tough. It's hard. Maybe boarding school, maybe other options are available. Maybe there's a compromise where you can find something like a boarding school, traditional boarding school, that may work for him. That's another option. Some kind of living environment where he still is supervised. That's a possibility. And there's real grief there. I have 4 children, 29, 27, 20, almost 20, and 14. And I will tell you that their differentiation is something that triggers grief in me. Real grief. Doesn't matter if it's for unhealthy or unrealistic reasons or an unhealthy or an unrealistic way. It's still grief. So even when it's appropriate and healthy and at the right time, there's still a loss and there's still grief. You add on top of the fact that he's asking for unrealistic things. He's not mature enough and responsible enough to take care of himself. You add on top of that, and it's more confusing. But there's a loss there. There's a real challenge and a loss. Thank you. Somebody says you've discussed being a safe person for your child to talk to, someone who can listen without necessarily intervening. Professionally, I'm a mandated reporter. What is the best way to respond when my child and his girlfriend, both adolescents, disclose that she is not safe in a safe living situation due to behaviors, or if her parent, uh, due to the behaviors of her parent, that might provoke her to self harm? I suspect some or more of this may be fabricated, since he is grounded ever since he refused to return to his therapeutic school and will remain grounded until he starts attending a local school that is still pending his enrollment. Their attempts to see each other during this time have been repeated tests on our boundaries. I mean, it sounds like you're doing tough boundary work against somebody who's built to kind of challenge those boundaries. I'm a mandated reporter also, and I've had circumstances like that. And the fact of the matter is, if you or I come into contact with a child who is being abused, if there's child abuse involved, if there's suicidality or a threat to somebody else's life, we have to report. And that's just the facts. We agreed when we became mandated reporters that we were going to let the law dictate that line for us, and we're accountable to that line. This is fuzzy because you don't, you can't really report emotional abuse unless it's extraordinary or severe. Department of Child Services won't listen to somebody who gaslights their kid, or who doesn't support them, or who rejects their ideologies around LGBTQ, their identity, LGBTQ identity, for example. You're just not gonna. That's not reportable stuff, or it won't be followed up on. You can always report it, but as you know, as a mandated reporter, the more subtle or nuanced mistreatment of children is not reportable, and that sounds like what you're up against. If the child is acutely at risk of suicide, you can, of course, report the child, and then professionals, hospitals, psychiatrists, psychologists will take over. The courts will take over. But I don't think that that's where you're at. I don't think that you're there. Um, yeah, I mean, it's. I think it's just the discomfort of listening to something that we really can't do much about. If it rises to the level of reportable abuse, you'll take action. But shy of that, it's just painful to watch somebody struggle, and to get that information through one of our children. I've had the same experience around the boundaries with your son, which you did not ask about. It sounds like you're doing a fantastic job. So good on you. All right, Malia, I'm waiting for the next one. What do you got? Maybe I lost Malia. Sorry, oh, there we go. Somebody writes, how often will students wash bodies and clothes, shower, etc.? Um, is it okay for siblings to write letters to students? Um, Wonderful question. Wonderful question. Our program requires them to bathe twice a week, and we do that in a few different ways. We have sun showers. We call them belly baths, where they essentially take heated up water, and we create an area that's private where they can bathe themselves using buckets or large cans of water. If they don't do that, it becomes a clinical issue. As you might know, because we're a primitive living nomadic model, it's not the kind of bathing regimen that most of us engage in at home. And it goes back to primitive cultures. Even in our own culture in the United States, many years ago, housework and hygiene were not as the bar was not set so high. You had a couple of pairs of clothes, right? You had your nice clothes and your play clothes and maybe your work clothes. And part of what has transformed our lives as Americans is the amount of housework, of domestic chores, has risen dramatically over the years. So they get new clothes twice a week. They're asked to bathe twice a week. If they're not participating in that, then it becomes a clinical issue. That it gets the attention of the therapist, and they start dealing with it clinically around self-esteem, around kind of understanding socially. If they need more than that, and our female clients will get some extra resources, some wet wipes and some other things to maintain hygiene, especially during their monthly menstrual cycle. There's extra hygiene available to them. There are extras available, but those are the bare minimums. And the like I said, the showers and the clothes are twice a week. In general, siblings can write when the therapist clears it. We start off with mom and dad, or the primary caregivers, the parents, and communicating back and forth with them. But as the program moves on, we can open it up to extended family, to siblings, to grandparents, uncles, aunts, to very close family friends, and maybe even to their friends. I mean, it depends on how far and how much progress they make. It can end up being boyfriends, girlfriends, and even friends that you might. It can get to the point where they're writing people and receiving letters from people that you might think have been bad influences on them, because we want, if we get to that point, we want to be able to treat that and deal with that. And how does that impact them? Sometimes siblings could write an early letter, like hopes and intentions letter, but it's all clinically dictated. That's the answer. It's all dictated and designed by the therapist. So while there is a gradual, from the beginning to the end, expanding of their communication circles in the wilderness, the therapist will dictate that and guide you along that. The goal for me, as well as therapy, is to give as much freedom and access as possible by the end, because that just tells me the child in treatment has moved along so much that he or she or they are getting more opportunities to deal with more variables. But many students don't get to that point because they're still dealing with the most basic of the therapeutic steps for them. And so we might not get to extended family members. Sometimes siblings can reach them in a way that parents can't. Sometimes they're more sensitive or open to what the siblings have to say than the parents. But all of that, again, is discovered in a dialogue with your child's therapist in wilderness. Somebody writes, thank you for that. Somebody writes, in therapy today, my therapist and I talked about how my parents did not allow themselves to enjoy their children because they were afraid we wouldn't be prepared for the world they grew up in the Depression and World War II. They couldn't let us be soft and spoiled. Any thoughts on this concept and how it comes down through the generations? It's a wonderful thought and question. I mean, what you're describing is intergenerational transmission of trauma. It's not unlike those who suffered in World War II in concentration camps and the subsequent generations. Anytime there's trauma, and the Depression was a trauma, like the pandemic is a trauma. So it's a very large scale trauma shared by virtually everybody. Same with the Depression, and same with the World War II in the countries that were involved in it. And so their desire to make you, give you that hard shell to protect you from the pain of the world is evidence of their unresolved, unsorted out, unfelt, undealt with trauma. Even their grasping on, I would call their inability to enjoy their children. I've heard something called something like this. I would call it emotional anorexia, right? A restricting of emotions for fear of getting hurt. And that kind of dysregulation in a parent that was adaptive for them during the times that they grew up and that they experienced part of this collective trauma. It was adaptive for them. Later on, when those threats were removed, when they had moved through those threats and the Depression and the war was over, it then becomes maladaptive. And then they parent from a traumatized place. It's really not unlike every kind of trauma that people experience and how that can affect their parenting and their relationships. But the child learns they're cooked in a soup. They're breathing air and drinking the water of their parents' trauma, and their nervous systems are never fully at rest or relax. They don't feel safe because the parents don't feel safe. And so your nervous system, you know, children and parents co-regulate with children. That is, if your nervous system is relaxed, then the people around you will feed off of that. It's contagious. If your nervous system is heightened, there's a heightened threat, which does all kinds of things to the brain that I've described before, then the people around you feel that buzz and that energy, and they don't feel safe, and none of it's spoken, which makes it more difficult to see, more insidious, and more difficult to uncover and to heal and to treat. Obviously, you're doing fantastic work, and your therapist sounds wonderful to be able to recognize that, but it's a trauma response, and a parent's trauma response traumatizes children. You've heard me say this before. I love it from this documentary I saw on YouTube called the Prison Project. And near the end of this 7-minute video where this woman shares about how she brings the trauma informed ideas and shame into prisons, maximum security prisons, at the very end, one of the inmates in one of her visits says to the camera, "I'm beginning to understand that we're all traumatized children who were raised by traumatized children." And to a greater or lesser degree, that's the message. That's my message. It's not everybody has big T trauma. Not everybody's trauma is the same, excuse me, but everybody has something, and those things get passed on. Your healing can get passed on too. I mean, that's something I've read and I've seen quotes about it. Your trauma can be passed on, but your healing can be passed on. And I actually noticed who wrote this question because I saw it before we began. I saw you submit it. Just knowing that not only does your trauma get passed on to your child, but so does your healing, that can give you some hope. And that's, I think I want to just highlight that because I don't think I or we point that out enough. That we transmit our trauma, but we also transmit our healing to our children. And, when I think about the scope of my life as a father, one of the things I'm most proud of as a father is not that I'm perfected anything or that I'm amazing or perfect, but I've done some work and I've passed on some healing to my children. And I'm proud of that as a human being, as a father, as their father. Somebody writes, my 22-year-old has been in a residential treatment center for 9 days. She will not participate in group meetings because she has paranoia. Do you have any suggestions on how I can encourage her to participate? Connect to her paranoia. Again, I one time I saw this. This will sound a little bit disjointed, but I one time heard somebody talk about Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers. The the great human being that had his TV show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, for many years when most of us were young. And somebody was describing something about Mr. Rogers. I don't know all of the details. And somebody else commented and said, that's not what Mr. Rogers would say or do. He never tried to talk a child out of their feelings. He tried to give children a space to explore and to feel their feelings. Like I've said, moving through this, I mean, this is becoming the theme for tonight. Then the child is able to move through the feelings. I mean, when you think about substance use disorder, self-harm, when you think about mental health symptoms, they're all essentially present to prevent somebody from feeling. So the cure is feeling. I read and shared on my social media yesterday a quote by Rumi that said that the solution for pain is in the pain. And I believe that's what Rumi was talking about. The solution for the paranoia is in the paranoia. You lean into it, you understand, you validate it. I've actually heard master therapists during my graduate program. I heard them deal with a paranoid schizophrenic who was medicated. So very severe, psychotic levels of paranoia. And the ones that were the most successful and the most compelling were the ones who could validate the paranoia. One of them, I remember his name is Artie Lang. Artie Lang said to the client, he said to her, "You're right. People are taking advantage of you. People are judging you. We're at a conference right now, and there's people out there watching this on closed circuit TV, and people are taking advantage of you, and so your paranoia is real." I remember I had a student that I visited at a residential treatment center some time ago, and he told me that he had been taught that he had delusional feelings about love, and that he was taught that the idea that he had, that he came to the program with, was that people that love me want to get something from me. When they express or show love, it's because they want something from me. And he had been taught in his treatment program that that was a delusion. And I said to him, it's kind of not a delusion. Your parents, who I know and have worked with, have a tremendous amount of anxiety, probably rising to the level of an anxiety disorder or close to it. And I said, and so anxious people are good at kind of taking under the table, behind the scenes, needing you to be a certain way, needing you to be successful, needing you to behave in a certain way or make certain progress so that you feel good. And so there's some truth in this paranoia that you feel. And so that's what I would say to you is find a way to empathize with the paranoia, to validate it, and then turn it back over to them. But don't try to, if I could overstate something, be like Mr. Rogers. Don't try to get the child not to feel what he or she or they are feeling. Try to understand what they're feeling. And in so doing, the feeling will be released in time. And if it rises to the level of psychosis or schizophrenia or some disorder, medication will be needed. If that's the kind of paranoia that we're talking about. If you're just talking about anxiety or distrust and you're calling it paranoia, then I would connect to it more. That's the way through it. The answer to pain is in the pain. Somebody writes, how much time per week will the therapist be having individual sessions with the student or the group as a whole? In our wilderness therapy program, the therapist goes out there for a couple of days. They have individual sessions with the client, formal individual sessions. They have 2 groups with the group, and then there's time in between, downtime, that they're interacting with them. So that's the essential structure of the program. But like I think it was Debussy, the composer. I might be wrong about this, and if I'm wrong and somebody knows it, or you look it up, Malia, and correct me. Somebody said once, who knew music better than I do, that it's the music is not the notes, but it's the space in between the notes. That's the music. And I use that concept in therapy. It's not the session, it's the space in between the sessions. So the therapy and the therapist is the treatment team leader. and they're kind of supervising the structure of the program. But the therapy is, and wilderness therapy, that's one of the differences. I was right. French composer Claude Debussy said, "Music is the space between the notes." Um, the therapeutic growth happens in between the sessions. That's true for me and for our clients. And wilderness therapy is, I think, maybe more than any other thing that I've ever seen. It's especially effective in that in between time because everything is intentional. Everything is grist for the mill. We have 2 to 15 sessions per day, group therapy sessions per day with the clients. Some last a few minutes and some last an hour or an hour and a half or two. But it's all in the context of real life, practical living. It would be like if there was a therapist living in your home and anytime there was a conflict or a communication block or problem, the therapist stopped everything and said, let's talk about that. That's what wilderness therapy is like. So the therapist does it for 2 days, but the therapeutic staff and the program does it 24/7 or every waking hour all week long. And the stuff in between the formal therapy becomes the rich grist for the mill, if you will. Somebody writes, I have a 23-year-old son who has been in and out of treatment for 5 years, and a daughter 3 years younger who witnessed a lot of his struggles for about a year. They were very close, and she misses that closeness. She gets mad at me when I don't tell her the details of his struggles. I'm uncomfortable sharing a lot because I don't think it's mine to share, and some is pretty heavy. That would really be hard for her to hear. I don't want to keep things from her, but it also doesn't feel right sharing everything. I think your instinct is spot on. I don't think it's yours to share. And I think this is the moment where a couple of things. If you can, have her write letters and ask questions. Like let their relationship sink or swim on its own without your being in the middle. If that's not the right time, then you can wait and it should come relatively soon. Um, Two, like I said, her being mad isn't evidence of anything except for her being mad. It's not evidence that you're doing anything wrong. Although most of us were trained that when our loved ones got mad at us, we were doing something wrong. That's what our parents told us. They told us that their anger was evidence that we did something wrong. So that's where we learned that guilt from. Um, Having said that, you could just listen and understand and empathize again and fail. I'm sorry. This is my dilemma. This is where I stand. This is my boundary. And you get to be mad and you get to be hurt and you get to be frustrated. And you can suggest that she, when available and however available, start to ask questions of her brother. And you get out of the middle of it. It brings up I think the more fundamental issue that children's anger and frustration and hurt and disappointment are theirs, and it's okay. And it's not necessarily a sign that we've done something wrong. It just is what it is. But our own family programming, upbringing kind of confuses us with that sometimes. Thank you. Somebody writes, our son has been oppositional defiant since a toddler at age 12. We found out he had ADHD. He has almost recently completed Evoke for 3 months and is currently, he has most recently completed Evoke for 3 months and is currently in therapy at a therapeutic school since this past September. His therapist twice mentioned that ODD is a lot like narcissistic behavior and that the latter can't see that they have a problem. What is the success rate of an ODD person? Any tips? He keeps making the same mistakes and his learning curve is steep. The natural consequence or payoff needs to be significant to motivate. He is 17 and I'm no longer working harder than he is in the journey. But he's almost 18 and we are concerned as this is getting closer to his parents having any influence aside from monetary. He is adopted at birth, but I think he has a primal wound that he refuses to address. The therapist won't work with him on his identity or adoption unless he agrees to talk about it. Can't he just work on finding out who he wants to be without addressing being adopted? I could spend hours on this question. There's so much depth and insight in your question, first of all. Um, how successful can a person with ODD be? I was diagnosed with ODD, and I think it was an accurate diagnosis as a child. And I got arrested, and I broke the law, and I used drugs and alcohol, and I got kicked out of school, and I dropped out of school eventually, and I was angry, and I wasn't physically aggressive toward other people, but I was verbally aggressive toward my mother and toward my parents. So I got through it. It sounds like there might be some attachment disorder issues here. And the therapist is sort of right about narcissism, sort of right? I mean, my therapist has this quote that she uses sometimes when talking about if I'm sharing a case with her where I'm stuck. She'll say to me, the client, and she'll say it in this false German accent, quoting one of her mentors. She'll say, your client will be the last one to know because they have designed it that way. So it's difficult to answer your question because you're asking essentially for a long-term treatment plan, and it's really, really, really complex. There are a lot of issues there, and there is wisdom in not pushing somebody to work on a specific trauma before they're ready. The literature and the research is clear on that fact. Clear on that fact that if the therapist or the parents or the treatment team forces somebody to work on an issue that they're not ready to work on, it's re-traumatizing to the person. You know, I can cite the book I just did the review on last week, What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, where they stated that my dissertation speaks to that to some degree also. So it's the research, the literature is clear on that. But there are ways, like you said, to go into identity, to go into attachment gently. I mean, that's the skill of the therapist. That's what we're supposed to be able to do. So I don't know, treatment planning wise, I can't speak to a large extent at it, but that's the question, right? That's the right question. Is how do you do this? The job of the therapist is to present a case to you conceptually that makes sense with why you all are, including them, are going forward in the way that you're going forward. That's essentially the job of a therapist in this field of wilderness therapy and residential treatment for adolescents, young adults, is to present a conceptualization that makes sense, that explains the child's behavior, that in the context of the conceptualization, the child's behavior makes perfect sense. And what also is accomplished by this conceptualization or this model or this explanation, what's also accomplished by this is that it asks you and them for certain things. That's our job. I'm to explain your child to you and their behavior in a way that it makes sense and that you and I know what to do going forward. It might be a longer process that you want. It might be counterintuitive and uncomfortable. All of that can be talked about and worked through. But that's their job, to explain it to you clearly. I'll take one more question. We have to decide the next step for our son after therapeutic boarding school. At first, we thought he would finish the 12th grade at home, but our consultant, educational consultant, didn't think it was a good idea given that he was away since last May and coming home this June. The whole reason he went away was to be able to live at home. What are your thoughts? Similar to what I said to the other question about a child wanting to emancipate themselves earlier, is number one, you get to decide. People can advise you, but you get to decide. And the way we learn is by making choices and seeing how they work out. That's how we learn. It's how I learn. It's what life is. It's a lesson. I read a quote today that says, so much of my insight in learning and my good judgment came from making decisions. And many of those decisions were embedded in bad judgment. In other words, a clever way of saying we learn good judgment by making mistakes. But as a therapist, when I support families, coach parents, I talk about principles. I give you my thoughts, my ideas. But ultimately, I let you know that it's your right, your responsibility to own the decision and to make it. So make the one that you want. Listen to people that you trust, weigh it, ask tough questions, demand intelligent answers, and then make the decision. Um, I'm going to be nitpicky. It might be annoying, but this is what I'm here for, right? You wrote the whole reason that he went away was to be able to live at home. I don't think that that's true. The reason he went to treatment was to heal so that he would have a meaningful and fulfilling life. You expected it to be at home. You imagined it would be the next step. But I think you would agree with me. The reason he went away was to heal, to see how his once adaptive behavior has now become maladaptive, and to treat the symptoms, the disorder, the mental health issues, the addiction, whatever it is, to heal. And while you might have thought that that was going to result in him living at home before he moved away for college, it's somebody's telling you that that's not the best idea in their opinion. You get to decide. But that's just a grief and a letting go. I've had two of my children go to some kind of treatment out of the home. I've had three of my children go off to college away from home. New York, Chicago, and LA. Those are the three places my kids have gone to school. It's hard no matter when. It's hard when it's for the right reasons. I think it's hard when it's for one of these reasons that we didn't expect or see or anticipate. So part of that phrase, the whole reason, the reason I'm picking on the verbiage there, the language there, is that I don't think that's true. I don't think that's what you meant. And I think, again, there's a grief, there's a loss there. There's something more fundamental you were trying to accomplish. And, part of this journey for parents who are supporting their children that are going through mental health issues, or themselves or their spouses, if you're a podcast listener, we have a large podcast audience, is that we have to let go of the ideas, the plan that we thought was going to happen sometime, and embrace the plan that is presenting itself. And I think that there's a grief, a loss, a sadness that comes with that. So that's my thought about that. All right, folks, any leftover questions I can address next time. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are on Amazon and Audible. We have online support groups for wilderness families and alumni. The next one is January 20th at 6:30 p.m. So if you are an alumni parent or a current parent, that is for you. We have an alumni only meeting once a month. January 25th is that meeting, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. And then we have a monthly intensives support group online, February 8th at 6 p.m. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information for any of these support groups. If you want to do a deep dive in your own work, and I cannot endorse these things too strongly, I believe in them. I've done them many, many times for myself as a participant. Finding You, in-person Finding You, February 23rd through 27th. We still have spots available. And we have an online offering. It's half the time, less than half the cost. You can do it from your home. I'm impressed with how profound the work can be, even online, even over Zoom. January 28th through 30th is our next offering there, and we do have spaces. We'll be adding a Returning to You coming soon. Email intensives@evoketherapy.com for more information. We have Evoke Therapy attachment trained and based therapists that do coaching, virtual coaching for families, individuals, and parents online. If you're interested in that, you want extra support, you're not even an Evoke, you're not part of the Evoke family in terms of having your child here, this is for anybody. Just contact coaching@evoketherapy.com. We have pursuits trips, which are adventure trips for families or adults, or families and adults, anywhere from 3 to 30 days. It can be in between programs. At the end of a program, it can be therapy light. It can be, think of this as a subacute program. So you're not in crisis necessarily, but you want something for the family that's going to give them some support, but also going to be something that the kids are going to enjoy. And they're not at that acute level, so they might not need a really heavy therapy program. We ask all current families to go to 6 12-step support groups. Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. We encourage you to check those out and to attend any combination of 6 of those to see how it feels and if it's something that can give you support. RefugeRecovery.org and NAMI.org are great places to go to find free resources and classes and support in your local area at your local chapter. All of these broadcasts are available on any podcast app, including Spotify. Just go to your app and search Finding You an Evoke Therapy Podcast. You could also use my name to find it, or go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen there. You can find Evoke or me, Brad Reedy, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy or at Dr. Brad Reedy, DrBradReedy, respectively. You can also find Evoke Intensives on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And then the Evoke Therapy blog has new content each week, beautifully, wonderfully curated by Malia, who is also our moderator for these. So thank you, Malia. And go there to our website to have education and support from all of the Evoke staff. My next broadcast will be a week from tonight, January 25th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I'll be talking about divorce, blended families, step parenting, and co-parenting, a very popular topic for a lot of people, even especially that co-parenting topic when you have somebody that you feel like isn't supporting the work or isn't doing their work. So again, folks, thank you for joining me for and on behalf of the people that you love, for your children, for your family, for those that you serve professionally. Thank you for being willing to do your work. The greatest thing you can offer those that you love is your own healing. And thank you for participating in that healing with me on these broadcasts. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.